This time on STV, I take a trip down memory lane to feature a couple of sleds that really helped define the hypersled category. Then we slow things down a little bit to a trip we took to Simcoe County here in Ontario. But we're back on the gas again in Afterburn, where we feature the Polaris VR1. Stick around, because this show is going to be good. STV is brought to you by Yamaha, revs your heart. Ford F-Series, Canada's best-selling line of pickup trucks for 57 years. And by Polaris, think outside. I was feeling a little bit nostalgic the other day when I started the process of writing for this show, so I thought it was time to take a look back at where two of the most high-performance snowmobiles on the market today came from, the Yamaha SRX and the Arctic Cat Thundercat, two sleds that I absolutely enjoy riding every time I get to pull the trigger on one. So I hope you enjoy this look back. The rivalry between the SRX and the Thundercat goes back a couple of decades now to the glory days of greasy old triples, back when the top speed of a sled was its most important characteristic, one that the snowmobile manufacturers would sell on. Other details like comfort, handling, and big bump suspensions were often sacrificed on the altar of speed. And this was okay. We really didn't know any better, but things did change in the industry. The rider-forward designs began to appear, and consumers began to demand better rough trail capabilities, not to mention the increasing popularity of two-stroke twins. All this spelled the death of the high-speed triples, and for a long time, hypersleds capable of easily running down the 100-mile-an-hour barrier were a thing of the past. All this happened right around the time Yamaha laid to rest the SRX 700 Triple Triple and introduced the first performance four-stroke to the market, the RX1. And for a couple of years, its motorcycle-derived four-cylinder engine ran with the likes of the Machs, XCRs, and Thundercats. Although speedy and brought an entirely new sound to the performance snowmobile market, it wasn't the fastest sled on the snow, or frankly, the best handling. The Pro-Action rear suspension of the RX1 was a holdover from the previous generation two-stroke models and simply wasn't in the same league as its competitors. Out front, Yamaha did update to a double A-arm design and got away from the trailing arm systems of the past, and it wasn't bad, but overall the chassis design just wasn't well suited to the stand-up rider-forward movement that was about to hit the snow in 2003 with Skidoo's Rev. The RX1 was still an amazing sled to ride, and the shriek of the four-cylinder mill at 12,000 RPM was magic. Now, I still remember riding the RX1 for the first time and feeling a few mixed emotions about it. On one hand, it sounded like nothing else on the snow and it was completely new. On the other hand, the RX1 shelved the SRX, a sled that made a near perfect two-stroke whale and was one of my favorite sleds at the time. Riding the RX1, it had a very traditional feel to it with feet forward and hand hanging off the seat. Now, there was no denying it was fast, plus its fit and finish was arguably the best on the market, and the new four-stroke promised tens of thousands of kilometers of reliability. Without a doubt, Yamaha proved performance four-strokes were possible in the snowmobile market and here to stay. But right when the RX1 dropped, the life cycles of sleds like the Moxie, Thundercat, and XCR were in their sunset, and the popularity of snowcross racing was increasing, and the phenomenon of the stand-up style of riding Blair Morgan brought to the party were simply taking over. The evidence of this was the Skidoo Rev, something completely new, sitting right next to the RX1 on the trails. The requirements of packaging the components of a snowmobile to promote the rider-forward revolution was just one more nail in the coffin of the triple two-strokes, which were all about to go away. At the time, having the chance to ride both the RX1 and Rev platforms, I couldn't help but feel just a little bit sorry for Yamaha, having committed to a very expensive new chassis which handcuffed them to the traditional foot-forward rider layout, and knowing that things in the snowmobile world had just changed. Fast forward about 10 years, and by now all the manufacturers had worked through their transitional chassis to ones designed from the ground up with rider forward in mind. Now, the last to abandon this ship was again Yamaha with their Apex, which ended its production run in model year 2018. By this time in its lifespan, the Yamaha Delta Box chassis had evolved to include the first power steering system on a snowmobile and other highly technical features like the Yamaha reactive suspension system that linked the front shocks together with an adjustable valve to control the amount of body roll. And there was even details like chassis dampeners to improve the rider experience. Now, even today, the Apex sled is still one that's highly desirable to some riders who never really felt at home with the modern riding positions. Plus, they like the power steering. It could be argued that some of these features were included to extend the relevance of the Delta Box chassis that remained pretty much unchanged from its introduction in 03 with the RX-1, and you might be right thinking that way. But it also needs to be acknowledged that throughout that time, Yamaha succeeded in their goal to prove that four-strokes had a place in the performance snowmobile market, as other manufacturers dipped their toes into this four-stroke space both with and without success. On a sidebar, you might be thinking about Yamaha's Nitro as their answer to Rider Forward, which it kind of did. It definitely draws its lineage from the last years Yamaha was involved in snowcross racing. But by 2017, its production run had come and gone. So for the purposes of this story, let's leave it out and the Yamaha Viper, because neither one of those sleds could be considered a hypersled. Likewise, I'm also going to leave out the new Polaris Boost from this story, because even though the sled has amazing speed, I don't think it's set up for ultimate speed like the SRX is. So to make that comparison fair, I'm going to wait for Polaris to reintroduce a sled like the Ultra or the Storm into this category. I hope you're listening, Polaris. By 2016, the bromance between Yamaha and Arctic Cat was gaining momentum with their engineering partnership that married together Arctic Cat chassis and Yamaha engines. But this relationship was about to get a whole lot steamier with the introduction of turbocharged forced induction. Beginning in model year 2017, Arctic Cat introduced the 9000 C-Tech 4 alongside Yamaha's 998 Genesis Turbo. These sleds signified a solid marriage between the two manufacturers that continues to this day. Now, at a conservative estimate of 180 horsepower, with most saying 200 ponies at sea level, this engine and chassis combination set the stage for a comeback of the high-speed lake racer type snowmobile. Back now are the once familiar names like Thundercat, SRX, and even Mach Z, although that was just for 1 year in 2022. Polaris's XCR is in the mix as well, but it's currently staying true to its origins as a cross-country racer and is more at home devouring big bumps than in the pursuit of flat-out speed on the lakes like the others. Coming full circle in 2023, we still have the two hypersled titans of the market, the Yamaha SRX and the Arctic Cat Thundercat. These bad boys are still at the top of the heap when it comes to horsepower at 200 or so, which has been at this level since their reintroduction. Arctic Cat's Thundercat beat the SRX to market by 1 year in 2017, but by model year 2018, the band was back together and both sleds could be found on the snow. For that year, each sled was pretty much identical to the other, optimized for speed with 1-inch lug tracks and lower slung suspensions. In fact, other than the color, skis, and a little bit of clutching differences, the machines were essentially the same. Since 2018, the TCAT and SRX have been updated as you'd expect a chassis would be over its life cycle. Since its production, things like clutching have been updated and front suspension geometries have been changed, but the big news now for 2023 is that both sleds have been updated with EPS, electronic power steering. Then there's the color changes. The SRX has seen more variation here, going between blue and black along with a red and white heritage theme in 2022. And if you've been watching STV, you know my feelings on a blue SRX. It's just the way it should be. Now, Arctic Cat, on the other hand, has kept the classy black theme going the whole time. Still, these models have slowly diverged, just slightly, but significantly. Currently, where these models differ the most is in the track choice from each manufacturer. The SRX has kept the 1-inch lug Ripsaw 2 for that ultimate goal of speed, where Cat has added just a little bit of lug height, bringing its lug up to 1¼ inches. Both have their place, and even though it's just a 1/4 inch difference in lug height between the two sleds, they do feel very different to ride. Looking into the future, there's a new story to this chapter that could be coming out. The SRX and TCat are in chassis that are getting a little on in age, and Arctic Cat has just unveiled a new platform, the Catalyst. However, it's only available in a 600 two-stroke for now. The question is, will the turbo engine fit in the new chassis? I'm betting it does. But what's that look like? Will there even be a new version of the TCat and SRX? I don't know, but I sure hope it does. It still might be a few production seasons away, but by judging on the sales performance of these two machines, both new and in the used market, I'd say we'll continue to see these names on the sides of sleds for years to come. And personally, I'm going to be looking forward to pulling the trigger on those sleds too. Hypersleds will always be a small part of the snowmobile market and always command top dollar, which keeps them out of reach for a lot of us riders. But the technological improvements in this segment will filter down into the rest of the lines, into the sleds that you and I ride. Now, in my position here as host of Snowmobiler Television, I definitely appreciate the fact that I get to pull the triggers on these machines, but they're outside of my budget as well. Although one day I might be able to update my fleet of old triple sleds into a fleet of old turbos. This segment is brought to you by CKX. The worldwide international headquarters of OSM and STV are located just north of Canada's largest city, Toronto, in a little town called Willow Beach on the shores of Lake Simcoe. Now, last season, the STV crew went to a destination that's practically in our backyard, Simcoe County. Simcoe County is located just to the north of Toronto, which makes Highway 400 the perfect artery to travel to and from this region, in and out of the GTA for a day out on the sleds. This area is relatively populated compared to riding in some of the more traditional riding areas of Ontario. Here, you're not going to find long, lonely stretches of trail between towns or trails conducive to 300-kilometer days. Instead, you will find a trail system that delivers what sledders want, with twists and turns and elevation changes, but just in short durations between the many towns and villages of the region. High mile days are great, and one of the things that appeals to me as a sledder. I mean, those remote trails that have sometimes hours between stops, but let's face it, that's not for everyone. In a region like Simcoe County, as a rider, you're never really that far from your next destination, and depending on your goals for the day or the group you're riding with, being close to services for food and fuel or even a bathroom break can be more important than putting hundreds of kilometers onto your sled's odometer. The STV crew ride experience here took place over 3 days. Even though they could have all traveled to and from home each day, they did opt to stay in Collingwood on night one to get an earlier start on the next day's ride, but to also sample some of the suds at Northwind's Brewhouse, where most of the beer is brewed in-house. Go figure. The next day, the fellas headed out on Trail 703 through Stayner, and then on to Trails B111 and B211, bringing the crew to the picturesque town of Creemore on the Niagara Escarpment. Filled with quaint shops and a range of eating experiences from casual to fine dining, Creemore has become a destination for locals and tourists visiting Simcoe throughout the year. After a hearty meal at the Old Millhouse restaurant, the guys got back on their sleds for the ride back to Collingwood for an early evening out to enjoy the tastes and treats and maybe an adult beverage at the Black Bellows, which is in a former blacksmith's workshop. We about to make it happen, so hot we burn it up. We just can't get enough. Get down now, have some fun, 'cause we about to make it, we about to make it happen. On day 3 of the trip, which is the second day on the sleds, the guys turned their skis east towards Horseshoe Valley on Trail 421, which is one of the best trails in the region. Nicely forested with fast, flowing trails, the ride continued for the day exploring the many trails of Simcoe County before the inevitable return to the truck and trailer for the drive home, and it was nice knowing that they didn't have an 8-hour haul ahead of them after a very full weekend of riding. Coming up after the break, Polaris' VR1 is up in the Afterburn studio. This segment is brought to you by Ford. Back in the lineup for 2023 is Polaris' top-of-the-line command ship, the VR1. Now, when it comes to bells and whistles, this thing has got it all. There is no question that the STV crew has become fans of not only the VR1, but the entire Matrix platform that this sled is built on. And it doesn't matter what model it is. From the trail-oriented Indies and VR1s to the crossover Assaults to the mountain classes, we can all agree Polaris builds an excellent chassis. It would be easy to say the design of the Matrix just works, but it does. In Polaris' marketing speak, they describe the chassis as a rider-first platform, which is also a very appropriate description for the ride experience of the chassis. For me, this is a machine that is as capable as it is predictable, which I think is important for a performance snowmobile. At speeds that tickle the legal limit of the trail, the Matrix stays planted through the corners and gives plenty of space to move your body weight around to make sure the sled does exactly what you want it to do, and it'll also soak up all the rough terrain you can throw at it at the same time. It's interesting to talk to our mountain guys like Tyler Swarm, who say the same things about the RMKs in this platform. In VR1 trim, the suspension is set up with Walker Evans Velocity shocks on the front, race-inspired IFS front suspension, as well as in the rear Pro CC. These shocks are single adjustable compression only, with an internal needle on the shock shaft which ramps up compression as the shock nears its full stroke. Kind of like a bump stop, but more linear feeling. The internal needle is also the reason that these shocks aren't capable of rebound adjustment, but Polaris has done an excellent job setting these shocks from the factory, and the fact that you can adjust rebound does not affect the ride quality or the performance of them at all. Now, you may lose a few points bench racing with the fellas, but you'll be ripping past them as they're frantically making adjustments to their shocks, lost in all the settings. Another equally important option the VR1 delivers on is the Ride Command system and the 7S display on the dashboard. Polaris' Ride Command and the 7S display is one of those features you may not appreciate at first. I mean, honestly, even for me, when I first learned of the 7S display and the Ride Command, I thought it was more of a marketing gimmick, something that wouldn't benefit real snowmobile riders. But the more time I spend with the system and the more familiar I become with its functionality, the more I miss it when it's not on a sled I'm riding. The Ride Command not only allows you to plan, track, and share your day on the snow, but is a complete information and control center for the sled. With a touch display that functions with your gloves, you can set up the gauge package, smart hand and thumb warmers, interface with your phone and music, control the GPS, and a bunch of other options as well. Too many to mention in a single paragraph. This system is also very intuitive to understand, but the more you work with the system, the better you understand it and the more you miss it when it's not there. Now, there's one more feature available on this model, but it's not in this particular machine, and it's a device that attaches to the exhaust system of a snowmobile, converting that exhaust energy into wind energy, blowing more air into the combustion chamber of the engine, creating a much more energetic explosion in there, making the sled go faster. Some people call that accessory a turbo. I call it a Minnesota wind whistle. The Patriot Boost engine was designed from the beginning with forced induction in mind. This isn't a system cobbled together with add-ons to make work, and riding the Boost proves that. The boost and the power delivery is exceptionally linear without any sudden hits in the power band. The sled pulls hard, very hard when you want it to, but also is mellow enough to enjoy when speeds slow below plaid. So far, the only time I've spent on a boosted Polaris sled is at Snowshoot at West Yellowstone, Montana, which is at considerable elevation. Now up there, the turbocharger made this sled feel as if it lost nothing in the horsepower department compared to an NA version. Now it'll be really interesting to see what this sled feels like down here at home, where we're much closer to sea level. At elevation, the turbo was definitely building boost while making excellent noises from under the hood. I'm hoping that will continue at sea level, but if I understand correctly, total boost will fall with elevation as the sled consumes better air the lower you get. But I believe the boost, even at lower elevations, will continue to accelerate past where a non-turbo 850 will fall off. Whatever the case though, the boost will be a lot of fun to ride. The VR1, in whatever form it takes, boosted or not, is an amazing GT performance snowmobile with a very animalistic side to it that suits my riding style to a T. Now, this winter in the STV fleet, I'm looking forward to putting all kinds of miles on whatever VR1 I can get my hands on. This segment is brought to you by Ultimax. Now this episode of STV is coming to a close, but before we go, I want to take this opportunity to thank all the volunteers who spend countless hours all year long, not just in the wintertime, building and maintaining trail systems and making sure that we have access to the riding areas that we enjoy as snowmobilers. But one of the things we can do as people who enjoy snowmobiling is always respect boundaries and stay on the trail, because if we don't, it's not going to be long before snowmobiling is going to end just like this episode of STV. So we'll see you next time. Closed captioning is brought to you by Best Western Hotels and Resorts. STV has been brought to you by CKX, wear your passion. Best Western Hotels and Resorts, ready to get away? And by Ultimax Belts, performance driven, performance proven.